Happy Friday and welcome to this special edition of MindShare TV. I'm your host, Robert Martellacci, broadcasting from the MindShare Learning Studios here in the heart of Canada's innovation corridor in the great city of Mississauga at the MindShare Workspace. Today, we take a deep dive into the 2024 State of the Nation K-12 e-learning in Canada, definitive annual report capturing trends, challenges, and innovations in digital learning across our vast and diverse, beautiful country of Canada. Joining me, two leading minds in the field of online learning, Dr. Michael Barber, the report's lead researcher and professor at Touro University in California, and Dr. Randy Labonte, CEO of CanLearn and tireless advocate of equity, access, and innovation in Canadian education. We go way back, gentlemen. Welcome to MindShare TV. It's always a pleasure to learn from your insights.
It's great to be back.
Yeah, good to be here.
Awesome. The origin of the story. Michael, let's begin with the backstory. What was the inspiration behind launching the State of the Nation report, and why has this remained such a vital resource over the years? Kudos to you for your passion and impact and sustained effort on this. How many years?
I think we're just starting year 8 or the data collection for year 18 now with the 25th or the 2025 report.
Wow, you look a lot younger than you are.
And so I guess it started because back in 2004, there was a similar report that was released in the United States called Keeping Pace with K-12 Online Learning. And while I was in the U.S. at the time doing my doctorate, being a fiercely proud Canadian, I knew that we were doing this first. We've been doing it longer, and I like to think that we were doing it better at the time. So I felt we needed a way to begin documenting this. So I approached a number of organizations, and eventually what was called at the time the North American Council for Online Learning were willing to sponsor the report. And back in, I guess, 2007, 2008 was the first report that we put out.
Brilliant. Randy, would you like to chime in as well?
Well, at that point in time, we were just, as Canadians and practitioners, we were meeting in the U.S. at the annual NACL conference, which then became iNACL, which then became Aurora Institute. And all of us gathered over to the Digital Learning Collaborative, which is still going on, where we still gather. And we kind of said at that point in time, well, we have good conversations, but they're only in the U.S. Why don't we have these conversations back in Canada? And then Michael Barber also got caught up in all this that created the Canadian e-learning network, or CanElearn. Was then we began to create that here. And then once that was instituted as well, we partnered with Michael's research and brought it forward to try to shine a light on it in Canada as well.
Amazing. And I was part of Canadian E-Learning Alliance. Canada was quite a leader early on in online learning. So it's great to see this sustained effort. How is Canada doing on the global stage when it comes to e-learning in K-12 education? Are we leading, lagging, or perhaps redefining the landscape? Post-COVID particularly, I'll be interested to get your thoughts on that.
I think, a lot of it depends on what jurisdiction you're talking about. Because when you look across the country, we've got 14 individual systems if you count those schools that fall under federal jurisdiction, which are mostly Indigenous schools. And each of those 14 systems has varying levels of activity on this front, from some that have barely 1% or just over 1% of students that are taking one or more courses online, to other jurisdictions that are in the 10% or higher range that are taking courses online. And obviously these numbers are going to shift significantly in the case of Ontario, because Ontario now has mandated that students need to take 2 e-learning courses in order to graduate from high school, unless they get an exclusion for that requirement. So you're going to see in Ontario, the number is going to jump probably up to 20% within the next couple of years. So really, it depends on where you're looking and also what metric you're looking at as well. I just referenced specifically activity, but you're also looking at the way in which different provinces will regulate e-learning to make it more or less favorable, and how it gets funded and how the oversight that's provided and whether or not they're actually thinking about what constitutes X in an online environment compared to in a face-to-face environment. And the example I often use is attendance, right? Because let's face it, a lot of schools get
Right.
funded by the number of students that attend them. In a face-to-face environment, attendance means actually walking through the doors and sitting your bum in the seat. What constitutes attending an online school?
Right.
And so when you're looking at those kinds of conversations, Canada isn't necessarily lagging, but we're not leading in that respect either, because I can't point to a single jurisdiction where I think they're having good conversations around those types of issues.
Right. Interesting. Randy, did you want to?
Well, yeah, again, to go back, it depends. On numbers, we can make comparisons in terms of the numbers of students, but those are reported. As Michael says, it's also sometimes there's practices that are going on that not necessarily reach the data sets where you can compare. So it really is a variable piece, but I think that Canada does, at least the programs that we've been involved with, do a pretty good job of supporting students that have a need that isn't met in a classroom. And I think that that's the measure of success.
Right. And brilliant. I think, and for the benefit of the viewers, and perhaps if you're just joining us, I'm on with Dr. Michael Barber and Dr. Randy Labonte, and they are the co-authors of the State of the Nation K-12 e-learning in Canada. So I've seen some really great examples. Saskatchewan's been a real leader, and there's talk about a national effort. I'm throwing a curveball question: interprovincial barriers, thanks to our neighbors to the south, are being lifted. Is this a time where we should talk about education? We're talking about pipelines. We're talking about trade. Interprovincially, I can eventually buy wine from BC that I so enjoy. But what about education? We, for the benefit of the international folks who see this podcast, Canada does not have a national Department of Ed. I think there's a great opportunity, and that came out of our AI Task Force Institute this past week, that maybe it's timely to take a serious look at national collaborative efforts, as we've talked about before. There was an effort out of Alberta where we were going to create this national network. We were all invited to attend, but timing's everything. Thoughts?
Well, one of the things that you run up against is the simple fact that education is a provincial jurisdiction, and because of that, in much the same way in the U.S. that it's education is locally controlled, and I don't think we should or will ever go down the route that the Americans have, where there is a federal Department of Education. You could mirror it in Canada after our Department of Health at the federal level, where while health is a provincial jurisdiction, the feds give so much money for it so they can dictate things that way. I think the real opportunity for federal involvement comes in terms of providing the infrastructure to allow a lot of this to happen. And if you for those of us who have been in the field for a long time, if you remember back into the 90s, well, the SchoolNet programs, the programs that were put in place to bring broadband, and at the time we were just talking about some initial fiber into some of these, particularly rural and remote communities. We had those national centers for excellence around telelearning that the federal government funded, 6 or 8 of them across the country, to do research and to initiate projects. And some of those still exist today. If you look at the the remote school network in
Right.
Quebec. That was one of those initial programs. A lot of the connectivity that we have in my home province of Labrador was initially placed through these kinds of federal programs.
Right.
And that was actually probably one of the biggest things that the biggest opportunities that we missed with COVID was the opportunity to come out of the pandemic, particularly when you had a lot of people that were in need of employment, to be able to come in and do some of these nation building projects, is the term
Right.
we're using these days,
Mhm.
around laying that telecommunications infrastructure to be able, and it's not just schools. I mean, you can think of all of the businesses that would be able to leverage better
100%.
connectivity
Yeah.
in say Canada's north, or in the rural and remote parts of our provinces.
Well said. And you talked about nation building, it's state of the nation of e-learning. I don't see why we couldn't leverage the infrastructure and economies of scale, if you will. Randy, thoughts on
Yeah,
this?
I would say to use your rail example in terms of pipelines, is
Yeah.
that networking across the vast geography of Canada, I think, is really, really what you're driving at. But when it comes to the implementation policy, et cetera, that can be shared, but
Right.
it's specific to the jurisdiction, which then has the final accountability to say that you
Absolutely.
have met the standards for K to 12 education, and you can graduate on to post-secondary. If post-secondary still exists, right, Michael? I mean, MOOCs never took it over. I mean, its resilience is still being challenged again now with AI, et cetera. But I have a funny feeling that it's going to continue.
And
Well,
another area that we could be looking at, and Randy can speak to this
right.
more, is the ability to share curriculum across provinces.
Yeah,
Absolutely.
The reality is, yes, you want some local flavor, some provincial flavor in your English language arts course, as an example. You want some local examples when you're teaching biology or earth science or what have you. Social studies is probably one that, at least when you start getting into the provincial aspects of it, there's probably not a lot of sharing to have. But when you think of, a chemistry course or a physics course, or pretty much most
Yeah.
of the math curriculum, what's taught in Nova Scotia at some point is the exact same thing that's taught in Ontario, is the exact same thing that's taught in Manitoba, is the exact same thing is taught in British Columbia. Where it's sequenced, and if it's in the second half of grade 9 or the first half of grade 10, might vary a little, but the content is still the same. And I say Randy can talk to this a little bit better, because
Right.
we have seen actually a good initiative within the K-12 online learning environment in Western Canada that's been trying to leverage these things. And I'll defer to
100%.
Randy to give that example.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, to a large extent, I think we're talking about some of the infrastructure things, and my mind casts back to AI. AI is a great infrastructure capabilities around how you can use AI to create content curriculum. So that can be shared across the country. How you use artificial intelligence, as we talked about in the warm up, Robert was talking about baking in artificial intelligence options to support the work that we do as educators. So I
Right.
think that that's a common denominator, much like pipelines or rail lines or internet connections across the country. So I think we nationally can certainly focus on that, and should, but also reinventing the wheel has been a common sort of issue in a lot of these jurisdictions. So we can probably broaden across that and share. And there's a comfort and ability to share in those
Yeah.
types of development pieces. When it comes to my content, even as a teacher, I guard my own content and guarded it
Right.
very well. I shared as I needed to or wanted to, probably more than wanted to.
Yeah. No, well said. I'm going to cite an organization that we've collaborated with through C21. So, Dr. Guy Tetreault, who you would know,
Mhm.
former Sunwest School Division director and CEO, they started the Distance Learning Center that was acquired around COVID by the province. So they are offering fully accredited K-12 courses and for adult learning as well. And it's a remarkable initiative that they are wanting to collaborate nationally now. And you know, I've heard of other organizations in BC collaborating with the Florida Virtual School. It's timely to think east and west. I think this is an opportune time, and I couldn't think of a better organization than Can You Learn to lead that. So so lots of opportunities for partnership and economies of scale and nation building, right? I think that's, you know, the new prime minister is impressive when it comes to his thinking around that. But why don't we dive into some provincial highlights and trends? What are some of the most notable changes or trends that have emerged in the 2024 report? Where there any surprises across the provinces that you see or territories that stood out? For the benefit of those viewing from outside of Canada, we have 10 provinces and 3 territories, and we're giving away 2 VIP passes to our upcoming Canadian EdTech Summit for those who chime in and make a comment and share today only.
Well, I guess I'll get started with some of the trends. The first is that when you look solely at the 2024 report, there weren't many changes that we had seen. In many cases, it was the full implementation or the full materialization of things that had been sort of working their way through. You know, you mentioned the Saskatchewan example before. You know, that's a good illustration. The 2024 report, which reports on the 23-24 school year, talks about how that Crown Corporation that was set up in Saskatchewan, it was its first year of operation, but it had been announced 18 months earlier. So this was actually the third time we've issued a report that's talked about it. You know, Randy can speak to some of the specific things that have been happening in BC that have been, you know, 3 or 4 years in the making that are finally now being implemented, and we're starting to see, you know, how that is rolling out. I'll defer to you on that, Randy.
Yeah, well, in the BC example, they were trying to consolidate into something similar to what Alberta had before, and centralized and Saskatchewan has moved towards for that. But the reality is, it was suspended during the pandemic time, and then came in, and now there's 18 public and I think 16 independent schools that are licensed, so to speak, to offer provincially curriculum. Those that didn't get that applied and didn't be deemed by the ministry to be a provincial or provincially capable. What's happened in a lot of those jurisdictions is they've begun to shrunk in their district online programs, servicing only their students in there. There's not enough momentum or funding and capital in order to keep those programs going. So it's just been a sort of a slow trickle towards some provincial, and certainly in the Western province. And the similar in Alberta as well is that as the central piece has gone away, it rests on the individual district programs, but that rests on how they're going to be funded. And with the pressures right now in terms of public funding are there, the programs are actually being more restricted and constrained in terms of the funding. Therefore, the numbers are also likely to be affected because of that.
Thank you.
Randy mentions Alberta, and you mentioned, you in your question had the comment about surprise. Probably the only surprise, and it's not actually in the report. So I see we've got the website on the screen. Yeah. If you look at the 24 report, it's not listed in there because for the last number of years, the province of Alberta has been late in getting us the data. So, and because of that, most years they just haven't submitted. But this year they did submit, but they submitted after we published the PDF. So if you actually go to the individual Alberta profile that's there, we had been estimating basically based on the number of students involved based on historical averages, which had been in the roughly 10%, 11% range. What we learned about 3 months after we published the report, when we finally received the data, was that since the closure of the Alberta Distance Learning Center about 3 years ago, those numbers have actually plummeted. I can't remember the exact percentage off the top of my head, but I think it was in the 4 to 5% range.
Mm-hmm.
So the proportion of students that were actually participating in e-learning in Alberta is half now than what it was when the Alberta Distance Learning Center was available. So not actually in the printed report, but available on the project website. And that's actually one of the advantages of the website, is that we're able to update it in real time, whereas the report is just a one-time publication that comes out at a specific point in time. So it captures what we know at that point in time.
Interesting. I have to, it begs the question, post-COVID, who would have imagined that during our lifetime that 100% of teachers would have added some form of tech-infused pedagogy to their teaching day? And was that not a catalyst, or did it not catapult some provinces to embrace online learning and go full bore into it that hadn't previously? Or were there any examples of this? Or, as you coined, as Dr. Steve Jordan's coined, and we're going to have an arm wrestle as to who used it first, the great snapback.
Yeah. Let me chime in first on that, is that tech-infused pedagogy, I think, is not really a phrase that I would say would be accurate. I think it's tech-assisted, so the pedagogy remained the same. And that was the issue in pandemic. It was Zoom school. They were trying to do synchronous learning and just broadcast it out. And that was really not effective pedagogy at any point in time, nor did any of the schools actually look to those that were actually had online programs and choose the pedagogical instructional approaches that they were using. So that, to me, was sort of the epic fail in that particular period of time.
The other thing I think that we saw, Canada, I think, was uniquely positioned simply because each of the jurisdictions had some familiarity with, some level of activity, some level of awareness, particularly at the ministry level of these things. So when you're looking at folks who would be involved in creating a regulatory or governance environment, creating funding structures for those folks on the ground that were actually implementing these kinds of programs, they were already doing this long before COVID happened. And in some cases, when you're looking at the history of K-12 distance education, in some cases for over 100 years before COVID happened. So unlike jurisdictions where, and I look to Europe as a good example, where there was very little online learning at all. So this was really their first foray into any of this. And for many of them, as Randy indicated, it was a very negative one. For us, like the 4 or 5 folks that were sitting in the Ministry of Education in British Columbia or Ontario or in Saskatchewan that were responsible for this, for them, this was just another day at the office.
Right. Well, and appreciate your comments. I didn't say it was elegant because it was crisis learning, right? It was crisis learning, and a lot of the edtechs took a beating because of the negativity around it. It wasn't an elegant experience because it was in a crisis. So I think it needs to be qualified, and hence the great snapback, right? So what's next?
I mean, when we look at the numbers, in all honesty, if you were to remove the 2020-21 school year and the 21-22 school year, so the first 2 full school years after COVID started, and if you look at, say, the 3 or 4 years prior to that and the 2 years since that, we've seen just this, a gradual slope of increased activity across the country. And while those 2 years obviously dip up quite a significant amount because of, fear, public health concerns, and that kind of thing, when you look at where we settled back to, it's still on that gradual increase. So we've seen, the proportion of students that are involved in this, the number of programs that are doing this, increase a little bit every single year that we've done this study, and that hasn't changed.
Right.
Yeah. I think what's changed is an awareness and understanding that learning can occur at a distance through technology-supported means. And I think that that's what the takeaway is. And I think there's some other parents and the general public that is aware of how this instructional approach can be done.
Fascinating. Now, and let's unpack the whole concept of online learning for a moment for our viewers. I had a wonderful experience, and it was a blended learning initiative. We talk about hybrid learning, you're leveraging online learning in schools. So it's multimodal, right? There are a number of ways to integrate, which oftentimes in schools, students are going into school to do an online course, or they're doing it, choosing to do it remotely. One of the winners of our Schools of the Future Challenge, this kid was like Leonardo da Vinci in grade 4. He was a grade 3 at the time. He created this contraption, leveraging the UN sustainability goals, that was self-propelling solar system that was going through the ocean around the world, picking up plastics and recycling plastics. And it was a model he created, grade 3. But he was fully online in grade 3 in a school district in Ontario. So there are various forms to cater to. Let's remember, the student should be at the center here, right? And meeting the needs of the emerging learner, which is one of the most fascinating times to be in education today, I would estimate, because of where we're at with the tools that are available to us. Upskilling is a huge challenge for teachers, and then throw in AI into the mix. Thoughts, Randy?
I think there's two things that happen. There is the immobilization that's created through technology, and artificial intelligence included in that term technology. And I think what it does is it forces educators to have to shift and change. And there's a reluctance and recalcitrance of the bureaucracies to be able to do that. On the other hand, I think that the technology and AI, particularly supported and infused technologies and approaches, can really quite turn learning to be more personalized. But it's the bureaucratic structures that restrict that. So I actually, you asked the question in your pre-warm-up about what do you see in the future? And I see a fractionating of the bureaucracies and the structures. And it's already happening to a certain extent in some of the independent school, private schools programs. They're able to be more flexible and adapt, and they can modify and change policy, which then affected practices. They can drive policy based on practices. So will that happen in our current structure? Because you also bring in the national overview. There's things that we should be doing nationally, cross-provincially. They're restricted by our practices, our policies, and the way in which we define the bureaucracy to support learning. And I think that we're going to see a lot of offshoots come individually, and that might create some level of innovation, I hope, that lasts.
Well said, Michael.
Well, I mean, looking at this at the program level or at the activity level, you're asking sort of the question of, what do these things look like? And in the same way, if you walked into 10 different classrooms with 10 different teachers, you'd see 10 different sets of things happening. It's the same thing with online learning. You've got some that have a heavy synchronous component and use that quite well. You've got others that are much more particular about how they use their synchronous time, both in terms of their years of experience teaching. I know that when I teach topic X, the students struggle with this, so I'm going to save that for my next synchronous class, and I'm going to do some of this other stuff asynchronously. You've got some that are, completely asynchronous, but it's paced in such a way so you've got a cohort moving through. You've got others that, students are starting. 3 students are starting today, 5 students are starting next week, 6 students are starting next month. So they're all sort of moving on their own. And there are strong pedagogical examples in each of those different sort of versions of online learning, in much the same way that there are good pedagogical examples in just about sort of every classroom out there.
I would be remiss if I didn't throw into the equation to add complexity. Hashtag complexity is my one word for 2025.
Good word.
Faculties of education, preparing our next generation teachers. They're coming in tech savvy, but they're not coming out with the ability to leverage technology in a pedagogically sound way, on average, it seems to me. Thoughts?
Well, first, I would actually challenge the assessment that they're coming in tech savvy. When you look at the research around the technological competence of actually the last two generations, it's often described as a mile wide and an inch thick. They have a great surface level understanding and surface level ability to use the technology, but to use it for things that are meaningful and purposeful, in many cases, they're quite lacking. Now, to your question, about faculties of education, interestingly, when you're on our website, if you click on the research reports, our most recent special report looked at, the research was done pre-pandemic, what faculties of education across Canada were doing with respect to online and blended learning. And what we found was that the vast majority of them were doing absolutely nothing. It was upwards of 70% of them wouldn't even allow students to do their teaching internships or their teaching practicums in an online setting. They had to be done in a brick and mortar setting. How much of that has changed in the last 5 years, I'm not sure. I can tell you similar research out of the US has found that in 2011, there was like less than 2% of universities doing anything with it. In 2016, it was up to about 8% of universities that were doing something related to online and blended learning. And in a study that was actually just released earlier this year, that number is up to about 16 or 18%. Okay. So you're still only looking at less than 1 out of every 5 universities in the US that have any sort of focus or curriculum or opportunity for students to teach in an online setting and get experience as to how to use these tools in pedagogically sound ways. And I've got to, as I look at Canadian universities, I don't think that the US example is an outlier. I think we very much follow that model.
Right.
And it's unfortunate because, again, you asked about this idea of earlier about the opportunities COVID presented. I think one of the things that COVID should have shown us was that this is going to be a necessity. Right. Most people forget the fact that my own home province of Newfoundland,
right,
we had a what they call the once in a generation snowstorm there in January of 2020. Where in the capital region, the entire city was shut down for 2 weeks. School was shut down for 2 weeks.
Right.
And there was no ability to move over to online at that point. And then it was only 4 weeks later and COVID came around. If you look at, everything from the wildfires that we're seeing right now to, increased climate induced weather conditions to, natural disasters that are happening to while it doesn't impact Canada, you look at other jurisdictions, when you look at, war related things, the number of things that will disrupt a school system and require alternate ways to educate kids beyond bringing them into a brick and mortar environment is just continuing to increase. And it's going to be the same and just get worse. So why faculties of education really aren't putting this at the forefront?
Right.
Because, even if there's never another COVID-19, there are parts of Alberta that would quite well benefit from doing remote learning right now because of the measles outbreaks that we're seeing there.
Or mass fires, right? That shut down cities and towns, right?
Well, even if the fire is not there, I mean, you think about the air quality that you have and not being able to, you guys are just heading back to school now in the next couple of weeks. Every single school in your province right now is still going to be using air conditioning. If there's smoke in the air and particulates there, they can't turn on the air conditioning.
Unfortunately, a lot of them don't have air conditioning, believe it or not.
Do you really want a kid in a room that's
a luxury in
28, 29 degrees Celsius?
Right. Randy, over to you. Thoughts?
Yeah, I would concur that the lessons of the pandemic still have just been ignored. Call it the snapback. Talk about anything. We're comfortable, and the new experiences are just brushed off as an anomaly. In reality, if you look historically, they're not. There are continuous events that are going to be happening. And to go back to the post-secondary world, which I have been skirted a part of to a certain extent, the drive is not there. It's very much more bureaucratically traditional than even K to 12 in many aspects. So we've lost the ability, and again, I would argue it still exists, of
Yeah.
not being training teachers to be able to use some of the digital technologies. I think in a classroom level, I think that's where we're seeing some innovation that is
Right.
there. And I know that there are some school districts that are seizing the opportunity, both with digital technologies, but also artificial
Right.
intelligence, from a sort of a district-wide. But they're an exception as opposed to the rule of what's happening across the country.
Well, I can think of a couple of savvy professors who would be great catalysts and leaders at faculties of education on a national scale to do something really special on this. Perhaps a task force on it would be appropriate. But speaking of task forces, let's talk about a call to action for educators, policymakers, and ed tech innovators tuning in. What's your call to action based on the findings of this report? We need to be bolder. We need to embrace our new prime minister's nation building mindset. Let's be bold. Let's think out of the box here.
Well, I'll start with one that actually picks up on what we were just talking about. Yes, it's great to have some individual faculty that are pushing the envelope on these things, and the instances that we've seen faculties of education do things in this area, it has been because of individual faculty members that have been pushing it. Unfortunately, it's almost always done at the graduate level. So it's for folks that are, already teaching, that are coming back to get a master's degree, which
Right.
we're lucky that Canada actually has one of the higher proportions of teachers that do that. But in order for it to get incorporated into the initial preparation, that pre-service teacher training, each of the provinces have these standards boards that decide, that the students, incoming teachers need to have, X, Y, and Z as a part of their training. Until those boards start saying that, they need to have experience with online learning, they need to be able to incorporate these things in both their online and face-to-face teaching. The last time I was in a K-12 classroom myself as a teacher was, back in 2003. And I remember I had access to a learning management system back then,
Right.
that I could enroll my students in, that I could put content in. Here we are now 20 plus years later, and I challenge you to find any pre-service teacher program across the country that has even a single lesson that shows teachers how to design and deliver content in a
Wow.
learning management system.
Wow. Randy, call to action, bold initiatives needed. What's on your mind? We need to inspire these policymakers and leaders to really step up and provide the essential tools that our leaders of tomorrow need today to
Well,
thrive.
I think that it can go back to, for me to, and I'm hoping that the artificial intelligence, onslaught we can be used to leverage change much more quickly and rapidly than the pandemic did. The pandemic forced us to retreat. AI is at least encouraging us to move forward with some new ideas and means of how we can manage education and learning. But it goes back to the individual. I think the focus always needs to be on the individual child and what's in their best interest for learning, whether that be a combination of group effects or individual opportunities. And the environment should not be restricted to the physical classroom in its entirety, because there's many advantages that come outside of that. But it means we have to rethink how we organize learning all the way from the very end of it, which is the diplomas, the examinations or assessments, and the accountabilities that teachers have to how they are assessing what is good learning and effective learning that students can move on from. And I think that level is which our biggest hurdle to jump through. So again, I see individual innovation can do that within a certain context for that. But if we have enough teachers and enough programs, enough faculty that are going outside of what the norm is, I think that's can lead to some fracturing and perhaps some restructuring of our whole educational enterprise. That's what I would hope for. That's a bold vision, but it's one certainly that I ascribe to.
With that, thank you, Michael and Randy, for sharing your wisdom and for your continued leadership in advancing digital learning across Canada. The State of the Nation report is more than just a snapshot. It's a blueprint for action, reflection, and innovation. For our viewers, be sure to download the full report at stateofthenation.ca and join the conversation using Canadian EdTech and hashtag eLearningCanada. Until next time, keep the digital learning curve, and don't forget to stay connected through the MindShare report, and have yourself a great one of the final weekends of the summer. My name is Robert Martellacci of the MindShare Learning Report. Thank you so much for your time, and stay healthy, stay safe.
Thank you for the opportunity to be here, Robert. Thank you for doing this work that you do. It's tireless, but it's very effective. Appreciate it.
Pleasure.
Yes, much appreciated.
Grateful for your time, gentlemen. Cheers.